All right. Today we're gonna switch things up. We're gonna do things a little bit different. And so normally I do reaction videos, and so I'm trying out this live. This is the first live I'm doing on this channel, and it's basically about because first and foremost, people know that I was an ex-Christian. Uh, but like I've also mentioned, I also was something called the 5%er. Now, this is a topic you don't hear too much as far as reverts. And part of the reason is if you wasn't raised in New York City, then you probably haven't really heard much about 5%ers. You might not even never even heard of it. But it's a pretty small group. Basically a break off from the Nation of Islam, which is the people that pretty much follow Farrakhan. Now they call themselves Muslim, but let me tell you, they are not Muslim. 100% they not, because they practice and follow shirk. And for those that might be watching that don't know what shirk is, this is associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you add partners or associate partners to God, this is shirk. And this is actually the worst sin you could possibly commit in Islam. Now, Islam, first and foremost, I mean, I could get into how it truly spanned it from the time of Adam. But even if you want to just take it from the revelations of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where we were informed in the Holy Quran that this is what is called Islam, Muslims, those who practice it, uh, they basically they have to know that this was 1400 years ago. So 1400 years ago. Now this Nation of Islam stuff with the shirk and all that, this started like, I don't know, something like in the 1930s, 40s, something like that. So it's very recent. It's something new. And it really has no basis. It's basically all going on the words of a man who is called Elijah Muhammad, uh, and who claims that he was given this so-called knowledge, that he was given this by a guy named Wallace Fard Muhammad. Um, Turns out his real name is Wallace Dodd. Now I'm sure people from the NOI, Nation of Islam, they're gonna say that that's not true, and that it was proven that that's not him, and that's false. And I'm gonna get into that later on. But this is, if you was raised Muslim, then this is probably very strange to you. This is probably like, well, I never even heard of this. This is crazy. Uh, but even the Nation of Islam, even though they call themselves Muslim, I'm telling you, they are not Muslim. No way. No, you cannot teach and practice shirk and claim to be Muslim. It just don't go together. It's impossible. And and actually, after the death of Elijah Muhammad, and here's another thing. I have a real pet peeve about people still calling him the honorable Elijah Muhammad. He was not honorable. Okay? He was a fraud, he was a liar. Okay? Now, it was actually disbanded. It was, if I'm not mistaken, the reins was given to one of his sons who became a real Muslim, and he disbanded it. He did the right thing. He knew it was false. He knew the whole thing was a sham, and he disbanded it. Now they go around teaching all kind of stuff, and it's kind of like a sort of like I guess you could call it like black empowerment type of thing. And but what they would consider black is anybody who's basically not white. Okay, they have all kind of crazy wild teachings, like such as the white man's the devil. Uh, how he was created by he was created by a black man named Yakub, and now this might sound real crazy. Like y'all probably thinking, like those of you that's not familiar with this, you're probably thinking like, how in the world could anybody believe this? Like this is insane. But you have to understand, for one, this really has a following with inner city youth in New York City predominantly. And and I'm a product of that. I grew up in the projects in New York City, and so like I said, I'm a product of that. So I understand how we end up pretty much following this at some point, some of us, because we have no knowledge of what real Islam is. So you have like no comparison. And sometimes when you have something like you raise Christian, right? Like most of us, we raise Christian. And what ends up happening is like you end up finding out that this is false. And then you're kind of out there, and then you meeting these people that call themselves 5%ers, and who are for the most part street dudes. I mean, that's just facts. It's for the most part dudes that's like in the street, dudes you see around the hood, things like that. But then they're talking like things you don't expect from street dudes. They're talking about knowledge, they talking about books, they, studying, learning lessons, doing research, these kind of things which you don't normally associate with the hood. This is something that, I have to admit, like I was super ignorant. As far as, not that I was like some kind of scheming evil person, but I was ignorant in the sense I just didn't know much. I had a ghetto mentality. And so I looked at, like, if you was talking about studying books and doing research and stuff like that, I would have laughed at you. I would have made fun of you. I didn't see, I equated that with being like a nerd, you know? So when you see these dudes that's respected in the hood and on the block and things like that, and you see that they are talking about this stuff, it's kind of mind blowing. Now, keep in mind, we're not knowing anything about real Islam, none at all. If anything, we might know a little bit about Christianity, and that's it. And for the most part, we know a lot about the street and things like that. So when you get around this, and also let me not forget to mention, you end up seeing, well, hearing through the music, because in these urban areas, everybody knows that the predominant music is rap music. Now, there's a heavy influence, I think, from the very beginning of rap, hip hop, that's heavily influenced by 5%ers. And so this is actually the first time I ever heard the words Allah, Islam. You know, this is where I heard this from. Outside of that, I never heard of it. So then you end up, your so-called knowledge of Islam ends up being this stuff, this 5% stuff. And then it kind of takes you on this journey because it's intriguing. I have to say it is very intriguing if you're a thinker. If you have any sort of thinking, then it can grab you because it's very different. It actually puts a positive spin on attaining knowledge and things like that, which is very odd for the hood. And so I got captivated myself by it. And I know a lot of people that even if they didn't join, they a lot of their acquaintances was part of that. So they actually kind of fluent in it, you know. Uh, but unfortunately, now let me just say this: the one benefit that I got from it, I can't I can't deny, and that is, like I said before, I was super ignorant. I hated school. I don't talk. I never studied for a test. Never, ever in my life did I study for a test or anything like that. I did not care. You know, any test I used to just write whatever just to get it over with. And something about that, you know, that's why you can't believe too much the stats when they look at people's like your IQ. When it comes to the hood, to the ghetto, the inner cities, you know, this kind of stuff is like you can't go by those numbers because, like I just said, I didn't take no test serious. So if I'm giving an IQ test, I'm not even really reading the questions. I'm just skimming through it. So at the end of it, because I didn't even really try, what ends up happening is gonna look like I'm an idiot. Like I'm you know, it might show like, hey, this guy's borderline retarded. You know what I'm saying? And so you can't really go by that. And by the way, you know, if anybody has any questions, any comments, feel free. You know, inshallah, y'all join. This is the very first live for All Reacts. Uh, now, and this is a topic, like I said, that most Muslims they're not familiar with this. This is very strange. Very, it must sound insane, and it is insane. Looking back now, I realize how crazy it was. But like I said, back to my point, the one thing I got to give it credit for though is that I went from that super ignorant person and not seeing no benefit in reading and books and studying and doing research and all these things. I went from that to someone who fell in love with reading and studying and doing research and learning, seeking knowledge. I now I love that, and I do have to credit that to them. And the reason why was because my experience just being around it at first, just being I wasn't even one yet, 5% yet, but I remember seeing people that because you got some people that would join just to be cool. They just wanted to be down or something. So they would join just for that. They're like, yeah, I want to be affiliated with this guy and that dude, you know, because this guy's well respected in the hood and things like that. But me, I've never been that kind of person. I always dance to my own tune. You know, I was never much of a follower. And but if something intrigued me, I always had the kind of personality that when I get into something, I go in like for real. I'm always 100 about everything that I do. And so when I started seeing this, it really, you know, since it captivated me, I really was taking it serious. And what I noticed is because it's not for the meek. Because let me tell you, they will, they will absolutely call you out. Let me tell you, they will call you out, and that's without any doubt. They will basically embarrass you. And big shout out to Mohammed Rubul. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining. So yeah, so what they will do is, for one, consistently say that it's not a gang, right? But looking back, I have to say I don't know what the difference was from a gang. I mean, it was pretty much like a gang. You know, I can't deny it. It's like for instance, I would see they had something called supreme mathematics, right? And what they would do is they would show. I mean, they would have the date, right? And you're based on whatever the date is, you're supposed to be able to break down what the date means and go into all this stuff about what today's, and they call it today's math, right? So so if you don't know this, you could actually get something called what's called a universal beatdown, where they could beat you up if you don't know that. And I've seen many times, although I didn't really see that, I seen it come close. But what I did see was people get humiliated because they will put you on the spot. They'll start talking about something, right? They have something called a cipher, right? Where it's like uh, a group of these individuals, group of 5%ers, and what they do is they'll be talking, what they call building. They'll be talking about a particular subject, right? And when they're talking about this subject, they um, they'll basically expect you to be able to elaborate on this subject, even if you didn't had nothing to do with bringing it up or nothing. They'll point at you and be like, "Add on," and they expect you to know what you're talking about. And if you don't know, if you can't, if you just there like the fangs are gonna come out and they're gonna basically they're gonna just eat you alive. You're gonna get humiliated. You're gonna get belittled, humiliated in front of everybody with no mercy. And I've seen this many times. And and trust me, you don't want to be at the end of that, you know. And I was I remember saying to myself when I first seen this and then seen it again and again, I remember saying to myself, you know what? That will never be me. That I couldn't imagine being humiliated like this in my life. I just can't. Wow, I can't see myself being like ending up like this. And that's when, and because I knew I was more and more kind of taking this thing serious, I I realized like, okay, you're gonna have to learn. You're gonna actually start having to read books. You're gonna have to actually start doing research and studying and things like that. And so for the first time in my life, I started doing that. And because I started doing that, it it changed me. It really changed me because I didn't really realize that I had a love for this. I had a love for research and attaining so-called knowledge. Uh, I didn't realize this. I just always looked at that as a nerdy thing. And I would be quick to make fun of somebody who was even talking about something like that. But I didn't do that with them. And there was also, I used to like the confidence. Everybody seemed to have a lot of confidence. And because now I was actually learning things and reading different books and actually seeking knowledge, it actually strengthens you. Sort of like when you start learning about the deen, which is real Islam, it really strengthens you in the deen because you're actually the knowledge is when they say knowledge is power, it really is. It really is. This is what gives people khoshua, if I'm saying it correctly. like a certainty when it comes to things, when you're actually seeking knowledge and reading and learning and these kind of things. And so this is the one benefit, and I think probably the only benefit that I got from it. So I always look at it like it was a stepping stone for me. Now, having said that, I would never recommend it for nobody. If you're on the cusp or whatever, and this also, although this is catered to 5%ers, this kind of goes also for the Hebrew Israelites and all these what they call the conscious community. You know, they have all kind of different sects now all over the place, and it's predominantly in New York City, but now I see it spreading. I see it spreading a lot, especially the Hebrew Israelites. I see that spreading all over the place. I seen it even in London and stuff like that. But I don't recommend using this as a stepping stone, uh, because you could develop a love for studying and learning and doing research without that. This was just something I needed because of the environment that I was in. The environment I was in was just so ignorant that this this is just what it was. You know, I this was the only way I had to respect people for me to actually even think about doing that. And so through the chain of events and being around it, just knowing so many people that was in this, I just kept finding myself around more and more and more and more. Now I realize that this was how Allah wanted it. Because so this was the way to get me, uh, it was the beginning of the road towards real Islam. And this is the real message for those that are, because there's a lot of people out there that have heard these people. And what happens is you hear some things that make sense, right? Because it's not like every single thing they say is false, but you end up hearing some things and that are true, and then it kind of grabs you, it kind of hooks you. So, but what ends up happening is you come under this impression that you're bigger than what you are, which is what ultimately, you know, got me out of it because for a long time I was following this, and let me tell you, I felt like I was very powerful. I felt very, I don't know, I felt like I was untouchable or something. Like I felt so powerful in the mind to a point where it was bad, where it wasn't good, because the humbleness, there wasn't enough humbleness. Now, I always have somewhat of a humble just nature naturally, the fitra in me, but there was a limit to it. I really felt so powerful in my mind and the way I carried myself, and I just was like, I mean, I just thought I was all that and then some. And it felt like I was, they say that you're your own soul controller and this and that. And I had a lot of control over many things in my life for a period of time. So you kind of become disillusioned. It's kind of like rich people, right? You got rich people who, because they have so much money and they're able to, they're not struggling the way a lot of people are. So it's easy for them to not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very easy for them to not believe in Allah because they it's like they feel like they don't need him. They're just they're like, I got everything I want. I could do whatever I want. I'm not being punished. This and that. And even when they are sometimes, They don't even realize that they're being punished. They don't realize it because they don't equate it to Allah punishing them. They just seeing it like, yeah, I'm going through something, right? But they don't realize like all this stuff is you're just being given rope. This is just rope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you, and ultimately you're gonna hang by this rope. Because the true reality is that you're not really in control. You have control over some things for a period of time, and it's only for as long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows it. But the moment He wants to remove this, it's gone. And you're all by yourself in need. You realize, well, it's not that you're by yourself, but you realize like that you don't have no real power. You just thought you did. And this is, any 5%ers that might see this, they probably like, oh man, he bugging this and that. Oh, he's this and that. Oh, look at this man, he go and he want to submit himself and this and that. Man, let me tell you, first and foremost, you're claiming Islam, but this 5% stuff is fake Islam. Same with the Nation of Islam. It's fake Islam. It is not Islam at all. If you want to know real Islam, you don't go to Elijah Muhammad. You go to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That's who you go to. The Quran, the Sunnah. This is what you need to study. That's where the real knowledge of Islam is. Not this stuff that was in the, whatever, 40, 50 years ago, made up, and the only source is Elijah Muhammad. Some regular dude who got exposed and who lost his thing that he created, and it wasn't resurrected until Farrakhan came, and later on he comes and resurrects it, which was a power play. He gets to take the whole thing over, resurrect it, and he got rich off of that. Now, I don't hate Farrakhan, but I can't say I love him either, because he is poisoning the minds of people and dividing people and teaching them things that he's teaching them shirk, the worst sin you could possibly commit, associating partners with Allah. Nothing is more egregious than this. Nothing. And this is what he's teaching. This is what he's calling people to. And people falling for it. It's horrible. And he's teaching them this, that God is not a spook in the sky. And there's no judgment day and all this crazy stuff. So what's going to happen when you die? Because you have no control over this. You can die at any moment. And once you die, it's over. You're done. And now you really see how you had no power all along. It was all an illusion. It was just rope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving you. And now you have no control, no power, no nothing. You're totally at His mercy, awaiting judgment day in your grave. Awaiting judgment day, where you're going to be brought back to be judged. Then what you going to do? When you lived a life of rejecting the real Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You lived a life of rejecting that. Of committing the worst sin you could possibly commit. Claiming that the Quran has uh, uh, it's tampered like the Bible and this and that, and quoting from the Bible and all kind of nonsense, all kind of rejection. And there is no give me another chance. Once you're gone, you're out of there. And that's it. There's no coming back from it. And this is something that you really have to think about. Because, and you know, I'm sure you've all heard this before, but just think about it. If I'm wrong about there being a judgment day and a heaven and a hell, if I'm wrong about this, right, then what happens? When I die, nothing happens. Nothing. But if you're wrong, you lose everything. You have Jehannam, which is the hellfire, for all of eternity. No chance of getting out. Do you understand those repercussions? I hope you're thinking about this. This is something you really need to think about, really contemplate about, because it's not a game. And it's going to happen. I'm telling you. So instead of, why would you go? It's like if you're going to claim something, if you're going to claim some kind of truth and whatnot, then one of the first things is, okay, what are your sources? Where does this come from? Where you're getting this knowledge from? And when you have to say, oh, Elijah Muhammad, some regular old dude from the South that ended up moving to I think Chicago, and ultimately I think he lived in Harlem for a while. I'm not sure. I forget. There's a lot that I've forgotten over the years. This is a long, long time ago that I was a part of this. Long, long, long time, decades ago. So I've forgotten some stuff. But let me tell you, if you really think about that, wow, this source is just this guy. And the guy was exposed. Look, Malcolm is the one that made the Nation of Islam anything. He blew it up. He turned it into something. And when he came to find out that this was all fake and that this guy Elijah Muhammad was not honorable and that he was a fraud, when he realized all this stuff, he went around real Muslims and he learned about real Islam. And then he rejected all this stuff, all this nonsense. He rejected it all. And they killed him for it. May Allah have mercy on his soul. I mean, they killed him for it. He exposed the whole thing. And the 5%ers is simply an offshoot of that. The only thing they have different is something they call the supreme alphabet and the mathematics, and something they call 120, which is these lessons which is what I just mentioned, plus some lessons that came from the Nation of Islam and this and that. And a whole bunch of the stuff is completely false. It's like nonsense. Come on, man. Like, think about those teachings. If you're in it, think about the teachings that you're reading, man. Like, really, really analyze it. Think about it. It's ridiculous. It's nonsense. Then they teaching you like irrelevant things, the circumference of the earth and blah, blah, blah. Come on, man. What this does is it's like it impresses people that are ignorant, man. And that's the truth. And that's why a lot of us came to it. It's not because we were just so smart and so this and that, so special. Nah, it's that we was living in total ignorance and we got captivated by something that was different. especially when most of us knew that we already came to realize that Christianity wasn't it. So we had no ties to it. We had no loyalty to that. So then they go and they show you some things that's true, like they'll show you how the Bible's tampered. But meanwhile, they quote from it. Does that make any sense? Don't make no sense to me. You're gonna quote from a tampered book? That don't make no sense. And then you're gonna claim that the Quran is tampered with no proof. Just say that. It's crazy. And then they have no now. They claim to to believe in Prophet Muhammad and this and that, but they don't know anything about him. The real Prophet Muhammad, not no fake Elijah Muhammad claiming to be a prophet, claiming to be a messenger. He wasn't no messenger. He wasn't no prophet. He was a scammer. That's what he was. A fraud. They got exposed by Malcolm, and then they try to paint Malcolm as a traitor. Why? Because he was real? Let me tell you something that a lot of you might not know. Okay? That proves how Elijah Muhammad is a fraud. And the whole thing is a fraud. So there was this newspaper, because he does claim he got his knowledge from this guy named Wallace Fard Muhammad and this and that, this mysterious figure and whatever, who told him, you're gonna be the one that kind of runs this thing and blah blah blah, right? So this guy, so what happened was there was a newspaper, right, that actually found him. They figured out who this guy was. And his real name was not Wallace Fard Muhammad. It was Wallace Dodd. Okay? And they put in a newspaper, real big with his face on it, a mugshot, his mugshot, because he was he was an ex-con. So they show a picture of his mugshot and they expose that this is that guy that he claims to be Wallace Fard Muhammad. And this is his real name. And he's actually a con artist from prison. Okay? So so Elijah Muhammad comes and he had this newspaper, I believe it's called The Final Call. I believe so. But anyway, so he has this newspaper that's part of the Nation of Islam, right? And they put on the newspaper a picture of the article, right, of them refuting this whole thing, right? And this is what Elijah Muhammad's claim was, right? He says, this is not the guy, right? And I guarantee you he doesn't know, because he supposedly knew all 36 languages or some kind of craziness. And he's like, I guarantee you he doesn't know all these languages and all that. I'm sure he didn't, because the real guy didn't know either. It was just a fake claim. And then he offers, I think it was $100 and something thousand if they can prove that this Wallace Dodd that they're showing in that newspaper is actually Wallace Fard Muhammad, right? So this was his big refutation of the whole thing, which I remember when I was part of it. I was like, oh, wow, look at this. Look, so there goes that. He debunked it. Because nobody came, like he claimed, no one collected that, right? So fast forward, years down the line, I ended up moving, and when I moved, I was still doing, I love research. So I actually have found out about the what is that? Where they declassify stuff, right? So things get declassified and you can actually look them up. It becomes part of public record. So I decided I'm going to look up the Nation of Islam because I was still a 5%, right? And so I go and I start like and actually and to be honest, at that time I was not fully a 5%er no more. I had a whole journey, and one day when I give my revert story, how I became Muslim, it all come out. I'm not gonna do that right now. But anyway, long story short, I end up looking up the Nation of Islam from the Freedom of Information Act. That's what I was referring to. Now, in this, there was all these documents, and I started reading them. And guess what I found? What got declassified was that the family of Wallace Dodd actually came forward to the Nation of Islam, to Elijah Muhammad, and they went to prove that this indeed was him. It was Wallace Dodd. And they wanted to collect that money. And they had all the proof they needed. And they came forth with the proof. At least they tried. And what did Elijah Muhammad do? And the Nation of Islam? They ignored them. They just ignored him and pretended like nothing happened. So nobody collected. So when he goes and tells you his followers and which 5%ers are also accepting this, they're like, oh look, nobody collected. Yeah, because he wouldn't allow them to collect. But it turns out it was him, Wallace Dodd, a criminal, a con artist who made this stuff up. And these people got rich off of it. They got a lot of power off of this. So that's something that a lot of you don't even know about. And this is what I learned through the Freedom of Information Act. And that the NOI don't talk about. But I read it for myself. And I laughed. I was like, wow, look at this. And that was kind of like the final straw for me. I was already kind of out because, for one, I wasn't around it, but I already had went through this kind of journey and this whole thing where, it was I already was doubting it and because of a chain of events. It's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put me in my place and he humbled me. He showed me that I don't have no real power. The power is all his. And he's the one that's in real control and that I need him. And this is what y'all have to understand. I don't care how you got things set up. Maybe you got things set up nice where, you got control over your chick. You got whatever, you're doing good in your job or whatever. You're making a little money. You got your house situation all right, this and that. But let me tell you, or maybe you got your street cred, you got people that look up to you and this and that. But let me tell you, you don't have no real power. At any moment, you can just start having some pains that start getting unbearable, and then you go to the doctor because you can't take it no more, go to the hospital, and then they just tell you, you got cancer. You got this disease. You got 6 months to live. And then let me see your knowledge. Let's see what that does for you then. Let's see if that cures you. Let's see how much power you got then. You think you're going to read a book and the pain's just going to go away? You think you're going to use your mathematics to make the pain go away, to save your life? No, you're not. You're gonna be 100% at the. You're gonna realize, because you the whole time you was, but you're gonna realize that you've always been 100% at the mercy of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, the real God, the real Allah who is one. So I'm calling on you to wisen up like I did, alhamdulillah, and come to true Islam, not this fake stuff that you see right there on the screen right there. Not that fake stuff right there. It's fake. The guy in the picture, those two guys on up there, that's the one guy they call the father, and I think the other one's Noble Drew Ali or whatever. Listen, these were X and Y Nation of Islam people who ended up leaving because they didn't want to stop gambling and doing drugs and whatever they was doing, womanizing. They didn't want to stop it. They didn't like being disciplined, and they made a good claim against the Nation of Islam because they were saying, well, if you guys are teaching that the original man is God, then why are you submitting? Who are you submitting to if you're claiming to be that? You're submitting to yourself, which is a great point. This is a great point against the Nation of Islam. Don't make no sense. But at the end of the day, all of it is false because they're an offshoot of them. Had they not come along, they wouldn't have their 120 and all this stuff. They wouldn't have it. And I say all this not to, that there's a lot of people, there's a number of people that I love and care about that call themselves 5%ers. So this ain't me like trying to belittle nobody or nothing. It's really just out of love. And I get it because I was there. I understand how you could get wrapped up in it. And had I not left and moved to a place where there was no more 5%ers, so that influence wasn't there. And then ultimately I started hearing about real, actual Islam. I started actually reading the Quran. That's what helped me to get out of that. And unfortunately, a lot of these people that I know and care about, they don't have this. They're engulfed in it all the time. And they don't have a way, they don't see the alternative. They don't hear the alternative. They don't hear actual Islam. So they're under this illusion that they have Islam, knowledge of it. And they don't know anything about Islam. Nothing. And I'm telling you, your life, your soul, your eternity is at the mercy of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, the Almighty, the one, the only. Nothing comparable to Him. No partners. None whatsoever. And that's why we submit. Because that's the only one that deserves to be submitted to. No one else, nothing else. And it's very empowering to surrender to the only one that's so much greater than you, so much better than you, the one who made the solar system. Sometimes I've heard 5%ers say, yeah, I'm God, this and that, yeah, I could make life, I could take life. You're not making life. You think because you have a kid that you're making life? That's not creating life. Creating life is having absolutely nothing and making life. That's creating life from nothing. You don't do that. You have a wife. You need a wife. Without a wife, without a woman, you can't have her pregnant, and then she needs you. Without each other, y'all can't do nothing. You can't even make no kids. That's not creating. That's procreating, but that's not actual creation. You're taking things that the real Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, and you're using these things to, it's kind of like taking wood and chopping it up and making a desk. Had there not been any trees, had there not been all these things that Allah created, you couldn't have made nothing. In fact, you wouldn't even exist. So you can't create. This is false. And taking life, let me tell you, you could think you're taking life, but how many people done went to kill somebody, put the gun to somebody's head, point blank, shoot right in the head, shoot them a bunch of more times, and the person lives. It's happened many times. So you don't even know if you could take life. You could try, but if Allah doesn't decree that that life actually gets taken, it won't be taken. So you can't even do that. Not with full certainty. You could only try. And if Allah allows it, then it'll happen. So what power do you really have? You really don't have no power. The only power you have actually is the power of your decisions, of your actions. You have, which is actually free will. I don't even know if power is the right word. It's free will, which is something you were gifted with. Because the angels wasn't gifted with this. They don't have free will. They simply obey. For us, you and me, we were gifted this thing. You were gifted your body. You were gifted your soul. You was gifted this earth that you inhabit. You was gifted your parents. You was gifted the food you eat. Everything, the air you breathe. Your heart is beating constantly, constantly, constantly. You don't tell it to beat. But it does it automatically, keeping you alive. You don't keep the air in the atmosphere. And without it, you die. But who does? It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The real God. Allah. The real boss. The real king. And we are really his slaves. You a slave. And so am I. Why? Because I just told you why. Because you're relying on everything that he gives you. Because the moment he don't allow you to have that, you're dead. And after you die, your soul is gonna be at his mercy, and it's gonna end up forever in a place either called Jannah, which is paradise, or Jahannam, which is the hellfire. And you don't have no say in it. What book you gonna quote to get you out of that? You're not gonna have no kind of power whatsoever. On the day of judgment, it's when you're gonna see it in its fullness. But by then it's too late. So why are you gonna wait for that? Why would you wait for that? It don't make sense. Why would you do that? You were playing with your soul. You you can't be that tough. I don't care how tough you are. I don't care what you done in the street. I don't care how much you respect you have in the hood. I don't care about none of that. On the day of Yom Kippur, the day of judgment, you're not gonna be able. You're gonna see that you have no control over nothing. You're gonna see that you was nothing but a slave the whole time, totally at the mercy of this one all powerful, who there is nothing to be compared to, the sovereign, the one really calling the shots. So it's time for you to humble yourself. I already done it and submitted myself and begged him for his mercy. And alhamdulillah, he's given me Islam. He's given me the truth. Alhamdulillah. And it's time for y'all to do it too. Come to true Islam, not this fake stuff, man, that from 40, 50 years ago, man, from a fraud, a hustle, man. You're committing the worst sin you can ever commit. Shirk, associating partners with Allah. To call yourself God is the most, wow, how egregious. To make yourself a rival to the Almighty? Are you kidding me? You need to wake up. It's time to rethink things, man. This is all a scam. You being hustled. You being fooled. You thinking you got knowledge. You thinking you powerful. You thinking you strong. You're not. Because I just told you, if tomorrow you find out you got a few weeks to live, the doctors tell you that, it's what you gonna do? All this so-called power you have and knowledge and all this stuff, what is it gonna do for you then? What? You tell me. I wanna know. I'll tell you what, nothing. It's gonna do absolutely nothing. And then you're gonna realize you gotta come to, this is my only hope, is to turn to the only one, which is what I did. My life had crumbled. I went from supposedly having control. I thought I had everything under control. I thought I was so powerful. I thought I was the man. I thought nothing could faze me. And my whole life crumbled. And that's where I knew I had to turn to something higher than me. And I knew it wasn't another dude, because he's no better than me. He's probably weaker than me. So I had to turn to something that's not a human being. I realized, wow, man, the only one that could help me is Allah. And that was one thing I have to say, is that while I was a 5%er, I didn't realize, that, I didn't even know that there was I didn't even know that they didn't believe that there's a one Almighty Allah. Like, I thought when we was calling ourselves God and this and that it was more like a figure of speech type of thing. It wasn't like a literal thing. Uh, maybe I was in denial or something, because I never stopped believing in Allah. I never stopped believing there was a God. But I was under this false impression, and and it was good friend of mine named Eli, who actually, I gotta give him credit, man. I always love him for that. Is that he said something to me that was truly real, and it didn't really hit me till later on. At first, I thought he was bugging. I thought he was wrong with this guy. But the realest thing he ever said is when he was a 5% too. He went for Christian, a 5%. But he said one day he left it and he came to us. There was a whole bunch of us, and he told us. He said, "I'm not part of this no more." And ultimately, when I asked him, I was thinking in my head, like, man, he bugging. What's wrong with him? And later on, when I linked up with him and I asked him, like, yo, what's going on, man? What you talking about? That's when he told me the realest words ever. He said, you know why? Because I'm not God. And neither are you. And neither is no other man. How real was that? And he was right. And I told him, I said, well, we don't believe that we're the actual Almighty. We actually this and that and whatever. I try to, you know. And he said to me, he looked at me, he said, nah, you're wrong. That's not true. They believe they literally God. And I didn't believe him. And come to find out he was right. And that's part of where that planted that seed of like where I really started to look, raising the eyebrow a little bit on this whole thing. But unfortunately, it still took time because I had things so under control. I had my girl under control. I had my household under control. I had everything, my ways of making money under control. It was the way I set it up. It was all going accordingly, you know. And even though I was doing some bad things, I would get away with it, all kind of stuff. But eventually, that luck ran out. Eventually, all of that started falling apart, and my life went to shambles. And that's when I started realizing I don't really have the power I think I got. And when it crumbled to the point where I realized, I was like, you know what? I'm not God. And he's right. He was right. They do believe that 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 we are God. And I just can't believe that. And you know what? I need him. If I ever needed him, I need him right now. And I'm not going to get into all the details in that. Whenever I say my reverse story, I'll go into all those details. But back to the topic is I'm calling y'all to come to true Islam out of love. This is it's not no me trying to like belittle you or trying to talk down on nobody or demonize nobody. Nothing like that, man. It's really out of love. Cause I feel bad because a lot of you have some really good qualities that will be beloved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you used it for what's right. If you didn't teach things that will poison people, if you didn't bring people to shirk, which is the worst sin you could ever commit, if you only came to the truth and utilized these beautiful qualities that you have, you can go a long way and you can live a beautiful life, a real fruitful life in here, which is the dunya, this world, and the akhirah, which is the hereafter. And you could be successful in both. And that's what you really want. You don't want to be gambling with your soul, because this is a gamble You lose, the price you're gonna pay is a price you're not ready to pay. I promise you that. I don't care how tough you are or think you are. I guarantee you, you're not ready for that smoke. You're not ready for that. So don't do it to yourself. Save yourself. Spare yourself. Do what's right. Come to real Islam. Come to the Quran, the Sunnah. Become a Muslim. I invite you all to become Muslim. If you want true peace, it's by attaining it's something you attain by submitting to the one and only creator, God of the universe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the real king, the only almighty, who doesn't have partners. And you have to reject all this 5%er, Nation of Islam, all this nonsense. And if you part of the Hebrew Israelites and all this stuff, or any of this conscious community stuff, if you like on the borderline or something like that, and it's kind of intriguing you because you never heard stuff like this, listen to me, please. You're gonna, if you follow these people, they will take you on a long journey to the hellfire. And this is something that you shouldn't want. This is something you should be running from and doing everything in your power to never be there, to never end up there. There's nothing more beautiful and that makes total sense like Islam, the real Islam, Orthodox Islam, what they call Sunni Islam. I don't call myself no Sunni or Shia. I'm just a Muslim. But if they're going to categorize it, it'll be a Sunni Muslim. This is what you want to do. I'm telling you. I'm pleading with you. To put whatever these people been putting in your head, and just put it to the side, and with a sincere heart, start learning, start doing some research, real research about Islam. And you're going to find that this is the truth. This is the way. Not this other stuff. You want to go to paradise? You want true happiness? You want true peace? You want to be on the right path, the straight path? This is the only way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran that He's perfected your religion. And He has chosen for you Islam. And that nothing else will be accepted. So don't be a fool. Listen to Him. Follow His guidance and the example and the guidance of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who did everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to do. And you will be among the successful instead of being one of the losers. Because anything outside of that, that's what awaits you. And in the end, you will find when it's too late that you ended up being one of the losers. So I'm going to leave it right there. This is the first live on this channel. And I hope there's some kind of benefit to whoever watched it. Even if, you don't know much about this topic or these, this whole thing, it might sound strange or whatever. Even to you, inshallah, there's some kind of benefit in it, because people that are actually going through this and are surrounded by this kind of stuff and this kind of people, such as I was. And that's why I felt compelled to do this. Okay? Until the next one, inshallah.